In Lithuania, people tell the story of the god Pamzimus, who was angry with the violence of humanity. So he sent the gods of wind and water to destroy the earth. He happened to be eating nuts at the time and threw down one of the shells. It landed on the highest mountain, and a few people and animals climbed in, and they survived the flood, floating in a nutshell. In the Victoria region of Australia, on the shores of Lake Teichert, people tell of a giant frog who swallowed up all the water so that there was nothing for anyone to drink. But the eel made the frog laugh. And when the water burst from the frog's mouth, it flooded the earth. All humanity would have been lost if the pelican had not picked up survivors in his canoe. The people of Ottawa tell of a deluge that covered the whole earth, and one man escaped, floating on a piece of bark. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of flood stories of every tribe and every continent on the face of the earth. So what are we to make of this? Natural disasters happen everywhere. Droughts, floods, tsunamis. It is human to make meaning from these events. And it is of God to give us hope. Now, at the end of the flood story of Genesis, there is a kind of wedding. God makes a vow to all living creatures, a covenant that for better or for worse, in war and in peace, in evil times and in good times, where we are God's to love and to cherish from that day forward and forevermore. And rather than signing a marriage certificate or exchanging rings with us, God signs the covenant with a rainbow. And not to get too romantic about this bow is of God's bow and arrow, the weapons of war. God hangs up God's weapons and makes peace with humanity. We are God's to have and to hold from this time forth and forevermore. And this is good because before the rainbow has even faded from the sky, Noah's sons turn against each other. It's an odd story, but the outcome is that one of Noah's sons, along with all of his descendants, are cursed to be slaves to the other two brothers. Now, this text has been grossly misused to justify all kinds of racism and slavery. I'm sure that God thought about bringing a flood and starting all over again. But God looks at the rainbow and refrains from destroying humanity because God has made a covenant with us. And no matter what, we are God's to have and to hold forever. We are in our own flood. The ruthless violence, the ruthless virus is all over the world, attacking bodies and destroying lives. And it would be easy to blame God. But we know much more about science than people did thousands of years ago. We know that the pandemic, in part at least, is natural consequences of the abuse that humans have done to creation. This is not God's fault. Moreover, God does not send floods or earthquakes of any kind. God says, build an ark. Build it with soap and water and masks and get on board the ark. Now, there are people who refuse to get in the ark. There are people who cannot get in. and who have been forced to survive treading water. There are people who die after taking every precaution, and people who have flaunted every precaution and lived. And God's heart breaks. So God got to work on monoclonal antibody treatments and vaccines. And God inspired extraordinary acts of courage in people like those who have cared for sick people ever since the pandemic began. God perseveres with us in every way possible to end the pandemic, to end the flood, to give us another chance. There is a rainbow at the end of this storm. The pandemic will end. We will be able to leave our homes and hug each other. We will be able to sing in church, go to concerts and baseball games, have a true dinner with our families. God will give us another chance to care for each other and for creation. I hope that we remember the lessons we have learned in this time of pandemic. For we have become more aware of the cruel impact of 400 years of racism in our nation. We have become more aware of the racial inequities of housing and healthcare and education in our judicial system. I pray that we do not become like Noah's family, like Noah's brothers, and forget and turn against each other and return to our racism. Now, Jennifer Chesek, in a beautiful article, has captured some of the hopes that people have for the new life after the pandemic. Marisha Johnson says, I hope we notice that there are a lot more white folks than people of color in positions where we can work from home. We're recognizing discrepancies now in how people of color in essential industries are being underpaid, underappreciated, and put at risk to ensure that the rest of us can keep on living. She says, I hope it's clear now that that's always been the case, so we can shift towards less exploitation of vulnerable people with this knowledge of just how harmful it is. I hope that we can use our second chance to bless and not curse one another. Andy Earthman says he hopes that the coronavirus will shine a better light on the need for fair compensation. He says the people on the ground should be paid and paid well. He says, I do believe the minimum wage needs to be increased to be a more livable wage and needs to be regionally adjusted. Lauren Jonick says, as someone who has had a chronic illness for 30 years, I hope people will have a deeper understanding that sometimes being home is not a choice, but a necessity. Mary Ganser hopes she will hold a new appreciation for the priority for true relaxation with loved ones without the distraction of what's next on the schedule. Mothers and fathers all over our nation hope that their children can get back to school fully. And what in that are your hopes for what might be different at school? I hope we can incorporate all the things we have grown to love about Zoom into the new ways of doing worship and Bible study and study groups when we go back to church. I have loved being with you all on Zoom, and I never want to lose the things, the immediacy of our contact, the way in which we can all come to worship. I hope that we never lose that. I hope that even as we get together in person and we enjoy each other's company and food at homes, and that we may continue to have Zoom parties and family get-togethers that include people that we would never have been able to include. The funerals that I have done have been able to include all people from all over the nation and family members in different continents and time zones because they never would have been able to travel to be present, but they are there. I hope our world will learn from this pandemic what we need to do to heal our world. I hope that they never open up Beach Drive fully again. I hope that we recognize that we don't all need to drive to work just to sit in traffic. I hope we will keep taking walks and riding our bikes and enjoying the parks as much as we have this past year. So I ask you, what do you hope for the time after the rainbow? What do you hope for our post-pandemic world? I invite you now to write your hopes in the chat box as a way to prepare for getting out of the ark. God has every hope for us. And God has promised to have and to hold us forever. God has signed this promise, this covenant, with a rainbow. Thanks be to God, my friends. Write your hopes. Amen.